Hey, welcome back to the SNS College Football Podcast. This is the Week 11 episode. If you haven't watched the pod before, we are going to recap all things Week 10 in a very brief manner. Then we're going to get into Conspiracy Corner segment that Tolman, aka Dave from Houston's got for us, and then Addison and myself will join him in previewing four pretty important games. We have a much better, I think, viewing slate of games this week. So let's get right into our brief recap. Addison, let's start with Utah and Washington. A game that was, I think, pretty competitive throughout. But your thoughts on that game? Obviously, Washington is not really going to be playing for much more at this point. But how do you feel about Utah, and are they still alive in this college football playoff hunt?
Yeah, I still think they're alive. I mean, it kind of depends on how the loser of the LSU Bama game looks. Like as long as it's competitive, then it makes Utah's case tougher. But if they can win decisively in the last few games they've got the regular season, which I think they can do, and then beat Oregon in the Pac-12 championship, then they'll definitely be in the conversation.
Right.
Especially, I think they're great on both sides of the ball. So, they're a team that doesn't have a ton of weaknesses to me. Obviously, they haven't played as many good teams as some of the other teams in the conversation, but I still think they're a really good team and are deserving of being at least in the conversation.
Yeah, they're very solid. I think Washington again kind of, I don't know if I call it like heartbreaking, but they just had, Easton had that bad pick six, and it just seems like in that game and in the Oregon game there was one or two things that really turned, or I guess like had a big momentum switch, and Washington was maybe a few plays in each of those games away from, still being maybe the Pac-12 frontrunner, and maybe we're talking about them in the same way that we're talking about Utah. But yeah, so Utah moving on. I think they still have. Do they have? I mean, do they have like a pretty tough stretch coming up here? Or are we sure?
Utah.
Yeah.
They've got UCLA at Arizona and Colorado, so all games that they should be able to win pretty easily.
Right. Okay. So yeah, Tolman, any additional thoughts on that Pac-12 matchup?
Seems like Washington's defense got worn down again. That's been a little bit of a problem for them this year. Also in the game against Oregon, they just don't seem to have the playmakers this year, and their program's still in a good place, but really not playing for much for the rest of the year for Washington.
Yeah, so let's move on to the other Pac-12 game that we previewed, Oregon at USC. This was a weird game. Addison and I were watching this actually live, and in the beginning it looked like USC might blow the doors off of Oregon, but then there was a pick six by Slovis, a kickoff return right before half, and then all of a sudden Oregon's next four possessions, they have turned the game into a blowout the other way. So, Tolman, I'll start with you. I don't know how much you were able to watch of that game, but your thoughts on Oregon, and let me ask you this too. Do you think that who's the better team right now? Is it Oregon or is it Utah, or do you think it's too close to tell?
Well, I think Oregon winning makes college football more interesting, because I think the Pac-12 is legitimately, the potential Pac-12 champions legitimately in the conversation for the top four. I think that Utah is not playing quite as good as Oregon, but Oregon hasn't been perfect either. This game was a typical Clay Helton letdown, and I'm not sure what it says about Oregon.
Yeah. Addison, we obviously were watching this, as I alluded to. Your thoughts on Oregon overall? Were you impressed with how they just kind of put their foot down on SC's throats, or do you think, as Tolman said, maybe that's just more Clay Helton's team just kind of giving up on them?
the biggest thing from this game I thought was just the volatility of USC. Like, they came out, they looked good early. They're up 10-0. It could have been more. Like you said, the pick six kind of turned the game around a little bit. USC, just watching them, there's no reason that they shouldn't be in this game. They're more than capable, but they make mistakes. They give up that kick, that back-breaking play right before the end of the first half. And then after that, I think they pretty much just quit.
Right.
Because it was a close game before that. They gave up the kick return right before half, and they came out and were just completely flat, and Oregon just crushed them from that point on. It was actually funny in the first half. Oregon, at the end of the game, even, like, Oregon had 56 points on only 65 plays. And it just got really kind of crazy in the second half for USC. So 4 turnovers, a lot of bad penalties again. So like Tolman said, typical Clay Helton. This team should be a lot better than it is, but I think that when there's some adversity, they just kind of quit.
Yeah, no, I agree. I felt like in the first quarter and a half or so, even going into halftime, I felt like SC was definitely the right side. But then, like you said, I think they quit. Oregon deserved to cover, and Oregon still clearly in the playoff picture. So let's briefly get through the last one here. Florida and Georgia, world's largest outdoor cocktail party. I don't know about you guys. It felt like to me that Georgia was never really in danger in this game. I think Florida played hard, but I think Georgia showed why they're still a playoff contender. Their defense was just very fundamentally sound. I think they put Trask in some tough spots. I felt like Jake Fromm really played very well, even though the Georgia offensive coaching staff still was not really calling that aggressive of a game plan. Tolman, did you feel the same way about that game? And do you feel better about Georgia after that game, or the same, or are you still not too sure about them as far as like being a national title contender?
Right, Nick, I agree with what you said about Georgia, but I still feel the same. That there just seems to be something missing with that team. They've got a lot of talent. Jake Fromm was a lot better when he had Lawrence Cager back, who made a couple of big plays.
Right.
But Georgia really didn't move up for me. And Florida, I think they've hit a ceiling with what they can do with Kyle Trask. They don't have much to play for the rest of the year, maybe get into a New Year's Six bowl. But if I'm Dan Mullen, I'd explore seeing what Emory Jones can do. That's a quarterback for him. It's kind of perfect for him. Has the right frame, comparable to a Dak Prescott that Dan Mullen typically likes.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely something that they could explore. Georgia, yeah, I agree. I think they are. I still have them a few points worse than all those other teams that are kind of in that elite tier right now. I'd like to see still a little bit more from their offensive coaching staff, but I really think it is what it is at this point. I'm not sure they're going to change. So
yeah, I just think that's what's missing. We've seen that with some Ohio State teams in the past where they've had good talent, but just play calling has been a little bit off or a little bit too conservative and hasn't done them well in terms of sustainability as a national title contender.
Yeah, totally agree. Addison, any additional thoughts, or do you want to move on into winners and losers?
Well, credit to Fromm because he did play well, and he needed to because Florida did a good job against Georgia's running game.
Right.
So he had probably his best game of the season, and some guys made plays. Like, he made a great throw on the last drive that pretty much sealed it. That was a perfect pass, in a big situation. So, and the entire game he played well. Cager obviously had a big game. So their pass catchers, Cager was really the only receiver who made plays, it seemed like, but Harrion had a good game catching the ball too. So, it was a group effort, and they did what they had to. Like you said earlier, Nick, it didn't seem like the game was really in doubt that much ever. So I think Georgia's kind of controlled it, and only won by 7, but they're definitely the better team.
Yeah, I don't want to spend really any more time on this, but wouldn't you guys agree that, if we feel like Georgia's receivers are the problem, Cager is good. He's not elite, but he's definitely from safety valve. Wouldn't you think that they should try to get, Swift and Harry involved in the passing game a little bit more? I mean, those are like their two best playmakers, it seems, and I feel like if they could throw it to them a little bit more often, that could possibly open some things up for them. But I agree. I think there might not be enough talent at receiver this year for them to keep up with the likes of Ohio State, Alabama, LSU.
Yeah. Also, I don't know what Florida was doing on that one touchdown play by Cager. Like the guy who's been tearing them up the whole game. They just don't cover it.
Yeah, I have no idea. But yeah, so Georgia's still clearly in the picture. I mean, they just need to win the SEC championship game, not blow it against Auburn, which that could be a very good game in itself. But let's move on to Week 10 winners and losers. Tolman, I'll let you pick if you want to start with your winners or your losers.
Sure. We'll start with winners. The number one winner by far of the week is Florida State for firing Willie Taggart. I will let you guys crush him in the losers portion. Also for winners, I've got Bryce Perkins, who finally was healthy. 30 for 38, 378 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 112 yards rushing, 2 rushing touchdowns. And with that win against North Carolina, it looks like they're going to be playing Virginia Tech, likely for the ACC Coastal Championship, their last regular season game. And then team winner is Oregon State. Our beloved Beavers have made this pod a lot of money, and they are now 3-2 in conference play, second in the Pac-12 West. Have some exciting playmakers, Isaiah Hodgins and Nartavis Pierce at running back.
Yeah, I had the Beavs as well. Jonathan Smith, head coach, he's doing a phenomenal job there. They only won 2 games last year. They were thought to be a basement team again this year, but they are more than competitive in that division, in that conference right now. They offensively cannot be stopped. Their defense is still not very good, but they're making enough plays. And like you said, Tolman, they've got the playmakers and the quarterback to do it. So great job by Jonathan Smith, and Oregon State coming back to life a little bit in the college football landscape. But my player winner, I've already mentioned his name a few times. Fromm didn't have an amazing statistical game, but it definitely was his best game of the year. I watched pretty much all of this game, and I felt like just throw after throw was just a big moment for him. They needed him to be big, and he was. And it's kind of unfortunate that he has to be as big as he is, in those moments, because I feel like, again, if Georgia's offensive coaching staff could, attempt to open things up a little bit, it might not be put on his shoulders so much. But when it had to, he delivered. So he was my only player winner. I just felt like he did a great job. I wanted to give him a shout out. Addison, go ahead into your winners and then transition into your losers.
Okay, well, I didn't jot any winners down, so I just have losers. So we'll go right into the losers.
Okay.
First one was the Baylor crowd. I actually have 2 crowds on my loser list. Baylor crowd because undefeated team, and that crowd was home game for them, and the crowd is like half full. So
new stadium too. Wolf.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what the hell's going on here? Yeah, I don't know. Apparently, there's not a lot of hype around Baylor, even though they're having a good year. Another loser. Well, the Nooner slate overall this past Saturday was horrible. Like, the only really watchable game was Nebraska-Purdue, which isn't even a great game anyway. So that
Purdue with a third-string quarterback too. Ugh.
Yeah, that tells you how low the quality of play was. That whole slate, not good. Clemson, they make the list just because they played Wofford. I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous that Like,
Yeah.
what are we doing here?
Right.
Like, this game, that's not even a real game. That shouldn't count. Like, what's the point? I just don't get it.
Yeah.
I wanted to look up some stats from that game, too. 702 yards to 256. And I'm sure that Clemson wasn't even trying for, like, half the game. So, I mean, yeah, I just get really annoyed when teams schedule teams anyway, but this is, the reigning national champ, undefeated team, and they're playing Wofford. So, kind of a useless game there. Clay Helton, I don't know how this guy still has a job. We always keep talking about this, and we mentioned it in our recap of USC. There have been a bunch of games this year where, it's just like USC should be a lot better than the product they're putting on the field. And it's just really dysfunctional. Things just tend to fall apart for them. Saw it again this week. That game, there's no reason. USC is not 30 points worse than Oregon talent-wise, obviously. So the fact that they end up losing the game that bad comes down to coaching and, also inability to keep the team motivated, because they just totally quit in the second half, I thought. So the next crowd that we've got is the Auburn crowd, because another game where
yeah, that was bad.
I don't know, there were a lot of empty seats at that game too. It looked like
A
on
lot.
TV, and I don't know if it was because people in the South just can't handle 40-degree weather, because I think it was pretty cold.
It was 44 when we checked it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if everyone in the stands looked like they were freezing.
I can confirm that people in the South cannot handle cold weather.
Right.
Yeah, so they're losers because of that. Because that's a normal fall up here in the north. So it's kind of weak that supposedly big program like Auburn crowd isn't really that into it just because of a little bit of cold.
Right.
And then last but not least, I've got the FSU program. Actually, the way this turned out for Willie Taggart, you might be able to call him a winner because he is a below 500 coach in his career. So, and now he's getting $18 million for his buyout. So Florida State, I think, just handled the entire situation from hiring him to begin with. Well, first of all, Jimbo Fisher left, and a lot of the reason people think is because he didn't like that Florida State wasn't, spending the money to be able to compete with programs like Clemson. The facilities just aren't as good. Seem like they're putting as much as they need to into it to be one of the top teams right now. So Jimbo leaves, and they hire this guy, Willie Taggart, who really hasn't proven that much in his career. And the situation is already kind of a mess from when Jimbo left. So it wasn't a good hire to begin with, but then you only give him a year and a half to try and turn around a program that was in rough shape. And now you have to pay him all that money for the buyout. I think just from beginning to end here, the whole situation, Florida State has just botched it totally, and now their program is in disarray.
Yeah. Yeah, Florida State's program, huge loser. I don't need to add anything more than that. It's just simply pathetic in Tallahassee. I got one coach.
We never liked that Willie Taggart hire. We said it 2 years ago on this pod.
Yeah.
We didn't like it.
Yeah, we were not fans of that, especially Corey from Denver. Not a fan at all. So we nailed that. But yeah, Willie Taggart, I guess you could call him a winner for getting rich as hell for being a mediocre coach. But I'm going to give you another coach that, how the hell does this guy still have a job? Speaking of guys that have Power 5 jobs, Chad Morris at Arkansas has yet to win a game against a Power 5 team. I know he hasn't been there long, but holy shit. I mean, Arkansas shouldn't be that bad. This guy was supposed to be like an offensive guru, and they suck ass on offense, and they're 10 times worse on defense. To get absolutely obliterated by Mississippi State, who is not good this year, it's an embarrassment. I really, and the thing is, I was reading that Morris's buyout it's going to be more expensive than Taggart. He is going to be expensive to get rid of. Arkansas, though, they've got that Walmart, that Tyson chicken money down there. I mean, I think they probably could just get rid of him and get somebody else in there, but he's bad. He's a serious candidate for loser of the year, or one of the coaching losers of the year. But I'll move on to my team loser is going to be Syracuse and their defense. They gave up, I believe it was, 65 rushing attempts for BC for 496 yards. BC won that game 58-27. Syracuse, I mean, holy shit, are they a joke compared to last year? They are atrocious. And I like Babers. I think he's a good coach, but this doesn't look too good right now. They are very, very bad. So, Tolman, you're losers, and then why don't you get it right into the conspiracy corner?
Sure. Syracuse was my number one loser. That was pretty pathetic.
Yeah.
UMass's defense continues to be historically bad.
Yeah.
They gave up 730 total yards last week to Liberty. Bad.
Yeah, not good.
And then also I've got a podcast least favorite, Noodle Arm, Josh Jackson from Maryland. 7 for 20 against Michigan, and their offense just seems worse with him. So they've completely fallen off this year over there in Maryland. But we'll move on to tonight's conspiracy corner. Probably one of the craziest conspiracies that I've come up with this year. And we're going to talk about LSU defensive coordinator Dave Aranda. So I read an article on ESPN that was recapping the magical Ohio State 2014 championship run, and they talked. And Dave Aranda was talking about what happened in their in Wisconsin's 59-0 stomping by Ohio State in that game. Dave Aranda was the Wisconsin defensive coordinator, and one of his comments that really jumped out to me in that article was, he said that he admitted to putting some things on tape that he didn't want to the previous week against Minnesota, and that was unable to be shown and Ohio State exposed. And he said that it's something that he still continues to struggle with in his career as a defensive coordinator. So, conspiracy is, look, LSU's defense has not been great this year. Something's been missing. They've been giving up big plays, and they haven't been very efficient overall. We know that with LSU recruiting, with LSU's talent, that they have the talent there on defense to be a top 10 defensive team. So I wonder if Dave Aranda has actually figured it out about how to hide things on tape and not present things, too early preceding big games. So you could look at that. Maybe he's playing with fire. They've given up some points, some yardage to close games against Texas, Auburn, and Florida. But I think that he knows this year that they have the offense that you can rely on to clean up and cover for some of LSU's defensive mistakes. And look, their biggest game is coming up this week against Alabama. And if you're going to hide things on tape, maybe you do it knowing that Alabama is the most important game you're going to have this season, and you got to get them some way. Maybe he's figured it out, has been hiding things this year, relying on that offense, and we'll see a different LSU defense on Saturday afternoon in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, it's definitely possible that he could be holding some stuff back. I think LSU, and we're going to get into that game, obviously, in a little bit here. I think that LSU and Bama have been obviously not what we're used to defensively. I think in some aspects they've improved throughout the year. But this is going to be both teams' biggest test for sure. I mean, they're facing, each team is, I think, considered probably the two best passing teams in the country right now. and they're both creating a ton of explosive plays. And it's going to be really interesting to see a guy that is considered, a fantastic defensive coordinator. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of game plan he does draw up. So, yeah, another interesting conspiracy corner segment. But we'll now.
And when it comes to conspiracies, the number one conspiracy that you're going to have is about college football playoffs. So we've got the live college football playoff rankings coming up right now.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia 6, Clemson 5, Penn State 4, Alabama 3, LSU 2, and Ohio State's going to be number 1.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wasn't sure if OSU was going to be number 1. I thought LSU might. I thought that Penn State would be 5, but I'm not surprised that they're 4. They clearly have a better resume than Clemson right now, I would say. Addison, are you watching the rankings right now, or what do you think?
Yeah, had it on. I think the top 3 was exactly what I thought it would be in that order.
Yeah.
I didn't expect Penn State to be 4. I thought
maybe Clemson got penalized for playing Wofford this past week.
Yeah, they're a loser. Yeah.
Yeah, Wofford and playing in the weak ACC this year.
Right. All right, so yeah, speaking of Penn State, let's jump right into these Week 11 premier games. We've got Penn State going to Minnesota, and what is going to be finally a test for Minnesota, because I think we truly don't really know a whole lot about this team yet. I think we all agree within our group that they could be very good, or they could possibly be a little fraudulent. Addison, I'll let you start, and as always, we're going to focus on when one team's on offense, obviously. I'll let you choose if you want to go with PJ or if you want to start with Penn State.
I'll go with Minnesota.
Okay, so yeah, what are we going to see on Saturday when Minnesota has the ball?
Well, before the season, we talked about Minnesota, how we liked the group of skill guys that they had. And, it's kind of been justified this year. Like, they've got a stable of backs that are pretty good. Tanner Morgan's actually been the big surprise offensively for them. He's had a very good season. He's one of the most efficient passers in the country. They've got 2 really good receivers, Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman. So, this side of the ball I definitely think is Minnesota's strength. In the red zone, they've been good at scoring touchdowns. 80% of the time they get in the red zone, they score a touchdown. Penn State's only allowing 50% touchdowns. So, that's going to be a big factor. I do like what PJ does in the red zone. Sometimes he brings in like a wildcat. They bring in like a tight end, and it seems like it's pretty effective. And he's obviously got several plays designed for those situations. So I like what he does. Penn State has been really good at forcing negative plays this year. We've seen that a lot. They're also the number 1 rush D in the country, only allowing 2.2 yards per attempt. So they might make Tanner Morgan actually have to beat them if they can shut down the Minnesota running backs. Minnesota's been putting up 40 points per game in conference play. We mentioned that these aren't the greatest of teams. Like they've played kind of the bottom of the Big Ten. It's been Purdue, Illinois, Nebraska, Rutgers, and Maryland. To Minnesota's credit, they have played well, especially offensively in all those games. So I give them credit for that. But this is really a big step up for them in talent level, what they're going to be seeing on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you nailed all the important points. I mean, I think one thing I noticed with Minnesota is even against kind of a softer schedule, they're allowing a lot of quarterback pressure. Their sack rate is very low as far as they are. Morgan's getting hit a lot. I think that, he's been very good, though. And like you said, Addison, even though they've played a little bit, and by a little bit I mean a very light schedule, they recently have looked like they have improved, and they do have a lot of they do have NFL talent on offense. I think that I try not to read as much into third down conversions as a lot of I think bettors or people do, just because I think third down stats are a big byproduct of how good you are like on early downs. But it is important to note that Minnesota is pretty elite on third down this year, and because Penn State eliminates explosives, like they're really good at preventing explosives. I think that it's going to be important that Minnesota stays ahead of schedule. I think it's important that Minnesota, they don't need to get out to a necessarily like a lightning fast start, but I think the offense needs to do something to make sure that this team doesn't get kind of like a too much of a shock from this major step up in talent, because I could see that happening early if Penn State gets out, to a quick, 2 touchdown lead or something. But I agree, though. I think Minnesota has the playmakers. They're very, very good in the red zone, as you said. That'll be interesting. But Tolman, so obviously you've got when Penn State has the ball. What are we expecting to see when they do have it?
So drive stalling out is still a problem for Penn State. They are only 40% on third down. They do have a relatively high touchdown rate. Pretty good in the red zone when they get there. They get some explosive plays. They still rely a lot on deep bombs to KJ Hamler. They're only averaging 4.3 yards per carry, so mediocre. They've been a little bit better. Maybe they found something with Journey Brown recently, but I'm not sure of his status for the game. He's kind of been in and out of the lineup due to injuries the entire year. I think you have to question how is Sean Clifford going to perform on the road. He's been very, very reliant on KJ Hamler. Big plays downfield, but overall hasn't been very efficient. We saw him in prime time struggle against Iowa on the road. Minnesota's defense, we don't know much about them. They rank 115th in the country in opponents' adjusted defensive efficiency. So that just tells me they really haven't played anybody to know. From a metric standpoint, looks like they're pretty good at giving against explosive plays. Antoine Winfield Jr. is one of the top defensive backs in the Big Ten. So maybe that could be the key for them stopping KJ Hamler.
Yeah, no, great points. I think I noticed that Penn State's been struggling to run the ball kind of overall, but especially on early downs. And they are allowing a ton of QB pressure in obvious passing situations. So I think if Minnesota is able to put Clifford in those obvious passing situations, those long, second long, third and long situations, that's going to go a long way. I also noticed that Penn State actually has a pretty big advantage in special teams. Minnesota hasn't been very clean as far as that part of the game is concerned. And I think in a game that we feel like is going to be decently close, that could be a factor. But I know both of you guys both have Minnesota +7, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's 6.5 now in most books. If I have to lean, I'm going to lean Minnesota. I think Penn State has been outcoached and outplayed in the second half of a lot of their games this year, as they fucking always are. I don't care what any Penn State fan says. Penn State, when they're good, they're really good this year. When they're not, they're very questionable, and they're very marginal at best. So, it's going to be interesting to see that coaching matchup in the second half. Does PJ have the upper hand with the adjustments? And like I said, I also think it's important that Minnesota doesn't, I think it's important that they handle maybe some adversity if they do get down a couple scores somehow in the beginning, if they do get a little shock to their system playing a much better team. But I would lean Minnesota with the points just because I have this game around 7.5 anyways, but I think that this is a huge moment for Minnesota. This could be a big-time program win for PJ. So there's going to be a lot that goes into this game for these guys. Let's go ahead and move on to another Big Ten game. Not sure we're going to spend as much time on this one, but Iowa is heading to Camp Randall. I believe Wisconsin right now is giving 9.5. Tolman, I'll let you start this time. You can choose whichever offense you want to go with.
I'll go with when Iowa has the ball.
Okay, go for it.
Have not been very impressive this year. They Nate Stanley, good pedigree coming into the year, just doesn't seem to have much playmaking at the receiver position. They don't have a stud tight end to cause some matchup problems for teams like they typically do. They rank 100th in touchdown rate, not great in the red zone, and they rank 83rd in explosive play rate. So in order to have success, they're going to have to sustain drives against Wisconsin, who they are first in busted drive rate. So they have a lot of drives that opponents go absolutely nowhere. They are holding opponents to a very low third down conversion rate, and even though they struggled against the run against Ohio State, they look pretty solid in the passing game. So I have a tough time seeing how Iowa is going to move the ball against Wisconsin.
Yeah, I agree. Iowa definitely. I think the only way they have a shot in this game is if they do get to the red area. They're going to have to score touchdowns, but they're not doing a good enough job of that. I think Wisconsin is doing a pretty good job preventing those. So I think that Iowa's going to have to get creative. They're going to have to throw a little bit more on first down than what I think Ferentz likes to do. But Addison, let's switch to when Wisconsin has the ball. Obviously, what are you expecting to see in this game?
Well, both teams like the ball control. Wisconsin's actually first in the country. They average 36 minutes of time of possession per game. Iowa's up there, so I mean that kind of, like Iowa's offense is kind of like a little bit of defense for them too. They always keep that defense fresh. Keeps it, that would be good in a game like this where Wisconsin usually is trying to wear teams down at the end of the game. Tone has been pretty good when Wisconsin stays on schedule, and like that's what their whole offensive game plan is. As long as they keep him in third and short, third and medium, he's been really efficient. It's when Wisconsin gets in third and long where they have more trouble. Iowa's only allowed 13 red zone trips this whole season, which is nuts. And also, out of those 13 red zone trips, they're only allowing touchdowns on less than 50% of those trips. Only 6 times they've allowed a red zone touchdown this year. So Iowa's defense, they've been, for a team that doesn't create a lot of havoc defensively, everything else, they do really well. Iowa, they held Penn State under 300 yards offensively. They held Michigan under 300 yards. They hold teams on average 110 yards below their team average. One thing that Wisconsin does really well is they on drives that stall out, they still gain yards. They don't go 3 and out very much. So at least when they're punting, they're flipping the field. So that's one thing that Wisconsin does well. Even if they're not scoring, we saw Wisconsin. I talked about Iowa's red zone defense. In the Illinois game, really the reason Wisconsin lost that game came down to their red zone offense stalling out too many times, and they left a lot of points that they should have had, and then it killed them at the end of the game. So I think Iowa, I think Iowa can, at least their defense has kept them in the other big games they've played. The offense just hasn't done enough. So I expect the defense to do their part at least.
Yeah, I think they've been very Iowa. They've been pretty solid overall. I've noticed against the run in particular, success rate and power success rate, they've actually been pretty poor. So I think Wisconsin's going to find some success there. And Wisconsin hasn't been metrically great themselves on the O-line, especially when they've had to step up in terms of similar competition. But, you said it. I think the key is that Iowa's been very great, as far as red zone D. If Wisconsin is able to punch a couple in, I think it's going to be really hard for Iowa to be in the game and keep up. But I'm expecting Iowa's defense to, I think, force some field goal attempts. And I think the number is about right. I'm very indifferent. I was thinking maybe Iowa 10 or more would be a lean, but Tolman, I believe you got Wisconsin minus what, 8 or 8.5.
Yeah, this is actually my best bet of the week.
Oh, okay, go for it. Yeah,
Wisconsin minus 8.5. I just have a tough time seeing how Iowa is going to move the ball against Wisconsin's defense, and I really like Addison's point about flipping the field. I think that's a big edge for me for Wisconsin, and they're going to cover in a field position game to Wisconsin's advantage.
Okay, yeah. Addison at 9.5. Where are you leaning?
I'd go Iowa.
Okay. Yeah,
because I'm just expecting a low-scoring, ugly, typical Iowa game, I'd say. So.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I do have a hard time seeing Iowa scoring. I think they could, like I said, maybe hold Wisconsin to some field goal attempts, or they could keep it within that number, but I'm really not sure. I know the total is what, like 38.5 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy low. I could see Wisconsin winning like 17-3, but let's go ahead.
Fine for me.
Yeah, right. Let's go ahead and move on to. We've got Iowa State at Oklahoma. I believe both teams are off a bye. Is that correct?
Yeah, a lot of since everyone's got 2 byes this year, it seems like a lot of the games they're trying to make both teams coming off a bye.
Okay, so yeah, I believe that line in a lot of books is actually up to 14.5. Addison, I'll let you pick this time. With which offense you want to start with.
I'll go Iowa State.
Okay, yeah, give it to us.
All right. Well, they've been, despite the the big losses they had from last year offensively. Montgomery and Hakeem Butler, they've done a pretty good job of replacing that. They're 7th in yards per play offensively this year. They're averaging 7 yards per play, so the offense has been really efficient. Brock Purdy's been good. One thing I would say about him is that he's, last game at least, he did not have a good game. He threw pick 6. They lost by 7. He's thrown more interceptions than I'd like to see this year, but besides that, he's been really efficient. And before the season, I kind of expected him to, have a good year after a pretty good freshman season. Oklahoma defensively, the big difference for them this year has been their ability to create havoc. They're in the top 10 in terms of negative yards, negative plays created this year. They're still not, a great team efficiency-wise defensively, but the havoc definitely makes up for that, and it's something they were severely lacking last year. Iowa State, they played pretty well against Iowa. They just struggled to turn it into points offensively. They settled for too many field goals in that game, but we went over. Iowa has done a good job of that this year. One thing that I like about this team under Matt Campbell is they have always played Oklahoma really well. Last 3 years, they've been competitive in every game, usually as a heavy underdog, and they haven't lost any of those games by more than 10 points. So I don't know what it is, but Matt Campbell just seems to do well against Oklahoma. I think that this game they'll be able to find some success offensively.
Yeah, I think the way that you can get to Oklahoma on defense this year is actually mostly on the ground. They are giving up a lot of rushing explosives. Iowa State doesn't exactly create a lot of ground explosives, but I think they have enough there that, if they can pop off even just a couple of those kinds of runs, it can take some pressure off of Purdy. And like you said, Addison, that offense has been pretty darn efficient. They're moving the ball at a pretty high clip. I think that it's going to be interesting though to see if Iowa State can establish some kind of run game, because if they can, I think they make this game very competitive within that number. But Tolman, let's go ahead and switch to when OU has the ball. Obviously, this is very arguably the most explosive team in the country. They're coming off of kind of a bad loss against Kansas State. Do you think they're going to come out kind of hair on fire and ready to put up some points in this game?
Well, it's not arguably the number one explosive team in the country. They are indeed number one in explosive drive rate.
Right.
They have seemed really unstoppable on offense this year, except when they've stopped themselves. They've in big games against Texas and Kansas, they've had some key turnovers that have led to them not covering the spread against Texas and actually losing to Kansas State. So on defense, Iowa State is okay against explosives. They're good at getting off the field, but even if they're able to keep Oklahoma behind schedule, Oklahoma with those big explosive plays has the chance to make up for it. So we've got shootout potential here. Iowa State's going to have to create some havoc. They're going to have to force some turnovers or allow Oklahoma to force themselves into turnovers to keep it close.
Yeah, I would say that I totally agree. I think they need to win the turnover battle, and maybe if they can do that, get a little bit of luck, this could be a big opportunity for them. You said it. I mean, Iowa State's great at limiting explosive plays. They create really no havoc. That's a little concerning to me that Hurts is going to be able to just sit there and pick them apart. But, they're playing kind of bend, don't break. It's almost like Washington style of defense. I think it's playing with fire a little bit, letting OU just drive up and down the field and then trying to play the red zone game. But if you can do that, prevent OU maybe you do have them kick a couple field goals, maybe you do win the turnover battle, then I think there is, obviously an opportunity for them to pull off an upset. But I'm not sure if they're quite good enough to do that this year. I do agree with Addison that I guess I'll go first. I would lean Iowa State at 14.5. I think that this game is going to be a shootout. I think they keep it within that number, but it wouldn't shock me if Oklahoma blew their doors off, if Oklahoma's pretty pissed after that Kansas State game. But you guys, do you both have bets on this again on Iowa State?
Yeah, I got Iowa State at both 13.5, and then when it moved up to 14.5, I took it again.
Okay.
So Matt Campbell is 3-0 against the spread against Lincoln Riley, so I think he's got something figured out there. That's a betting trend that I really like. So I like him to keep it within the number in a shootout.
Okay, yeah. Addison, any additional reasons for why you took it, or everything we said, does that pretty much cover it?
Yeah, I took it at 13.5. I expected this. I didn't know how it was going to move because I saw when I was looking, I saw 13, I saw 14.
Okay.
And on Bovada and Bet Online, it was at 13.5. So I was like, I don't know which way it's going.
Right.
Should just waited. But I took it anyway because I think that it's good there. Like Tolman said, Matt Campbell's got some kind of coaching edge. It seems like I'm not saying he's better coach than Lincoln Riley,
right.
But in this matchup, he's done really well.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we think that's going to be a pretty competitive game, probably a fun one to watch at, I believe it's 8 p.m. I think Fox has that game possibly, but let's go ahead and move on to
it's probably Gus Johnson, right?
Yeah, probably. I would say so.
If it's Gus, then it will be a shootout, and it will
be fun.
So yeah, we have the game of the week, possibly the game of the year so far. We've got LSU heading to Tuscaloosa to obviously play Alabama. I believe that line is currently at 6.5 in most books. Tolman, your adopted team, LSU, do you want to start with them on offense, or do you want to go with Bama on offense first?
We'll go with LSU on offense just because I have a little bit of inside information here.
Oh, okay, go for it.
About the Tigers. So, Coach O has said this year that Joe Brady, who they hired to be their passing game coordinator, they hired him from the New Orleans Saints, He says that Joe Brady has an answer to everything. And that means something to me. I think Coach O's doing a great job as CEO. The Joe Brady hire has been one of the best storylines in college football this year. What he's been doing with Joe Burrow has been absolutely incredible. So if you tell me that, if a good coach tells me that he's got a guy that knows everything, that has an answer to everything, this is the game that you want to have that guy. Nick Saban on defense is going to take something away, and it's likely going to be their explosive passing game. If Joe Brady can adjust, they can find some success. If they're not getting explosive plays, which is what they've been good at, maybe transition a little bit to the short passing game, try to move the sticks. Look, LSU is not one-dimensional. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been pretty fantastic. He's been hot of late. So I think for Alabama to have success defensively and stop LSU, they're going to have to force Joe Burrow into turnovers.
Yeah, which he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the country under pressure, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think that Alabama, even against a somewhat weaker schedule, they haven't been overly impressive as far as stopping the run, and LSU has definitely improved and picked it up as far as their running game is concerned. So if LSU is able to find, even like close to some consistent success moving the ball on the ground, that's obviously going to create a huge problem because I think you're going to have these young Alabama linebackers guessing a lot, and I think that LSU short passing game could pick them apart. So as far as a couple key matchups, I mean, this is going to be good on good regarding Havoc. I think whichever team, obviously, if Bama can create a couple sacks, create some pressure, maybe get a turnover, one of the rare times they can get one off of Burrow, that could be a huge moment that swings the game. LSU's red zone offense has been nationally elite. Alabama's red zone defense has been nationally elite, so something's got to give there. But I do think LSU's going to have some success for sure moving the ball in this game. Addison, Alabama, when they've got the ball, obviously we're not 100% certain about, Tua's health. I think we pretty much are all expecting him to play. But, he had this ankle issue last year. How much are you thinking that's going to affect him quite a bit? And what do you see as far as when Alabama's got the ball in this game?
Well, certainly no doubt he's going to play. Obviously, both teams are Del Pitt is questionable for LSU too. Both teams are
he's going to play.
Yeah, he's going to play. I know he's going to play, but
yeah,
both teams are probably not going to say much over the course of the week. So, yeah, I don't know. Tua's injury actually did not look very good, but so we'll see how hobbled he is. I have no idea. And that happened 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, 3 weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so it hasn't been long. That definitely makes it more interesting. But Alabama's been, it depends on what metric you look at, but they've been basically number one or basically top three in every offensive stat. Really no surprise. It's exactly what we expected going into the year. Football Outsiders has them as the number one offense, even ahead of Oklahoma. So that tells you just something about how well they've been playing, considering Oklahoma's been unreal this year offensively. It's their offense. There's not that much to say that we don't really already know. LSU defensively, well, Tolman had the conspiracy corner on that, so maybe they will surprise us. Also in this matchup, I typically expect it to be lower scoring. So, I don't know, these teams obviously know each other really well, especially the coaches. LSU, I definitely don't love their defense the way it's played this year. They definitely have the talent. I've been surprised at, the lack of efficiency from them this year defensively. So, I don't know. I think on paper it looks like it's going to be a shootout, but I tend to think that it's going to be lower scoring than people think. I think that's just how this matchup kind of plays out.
Okay, yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a corner of people that are thinking the same way you are. I tend to think this is going to be a shootout. I just, if LSU has some kind of, because their defense hasn't been bad, it just hasn't been like LSU elite. The problem they're having is they are giving up some pass explosives, especially the 10 to 20 yard type of stuff, the intermediate stuff. They're struggling actually quite a bit with that. If Tua is a little healthier than we think, I think that's going to be a pretty decent issue for LSU, or it could possibly be an issue. I'm expecting
We
them
saw
to.
what Texas was able to do on them.
Yeah, so and it's been a while since then. I think LSU has improved overall. I still think that is a slight issue, though. But that's why I tend to think there's going to be some touchdowns scored in this game. The one thing I will say is that this is another like good on good regarding Havoc. I think there's just going to have to be something that gives there. Alabama's red zone offense has actually, it's just inside the top 50. It hasn't been that great this year. Their running game has been, it's been good. It hasn't been that explosive. But LSU's red zone defense it's about the same thing. It's pretty much like right inside the top 50. It hasn't been amazing. So again,
but they've gotten stops when they've needed it.
Yeah, no, they have.
And like, some pretty big stops against Florida and Auburn recently.
Right. So, I think with a couple of these key matchups, something's going to have to give. I think one big thing I found is that LSU has a massive special teams advantage. Alabama, for God knows what reason, they just always seem to have a dog shit kicking game. And this year, you can add punting to that. They haven't had to punt a lot, and I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of punts in this game. But if there is a big situation where there is, an opportunity to flip the field, if Alabama has, if they need a big kick at any point, I give LSU a huge advantage there in a game that I think is going to be pretty close. So, as far as the number, we all have LSU, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, we all bet LSU at either like 6.5 or 7. So I guess we'll just go with, since this is like the biggest game of the year pretty much so far, Tolman, who do you have actually winning the game on the field?
I think Alabama wins the game on the field in a very, very close game. I think that for the first time in a long time, I have confidence in LSU hanging with Alabama in a game that could turn into a chess match. I'm also with Addison on just tending to think that this game is going to go under. I'm kind of throwing the metrics out the window here. Both teams just couldn't have higher motivations. The highest stakes game we've seen this year, and I think LSU can keep it very close.
Okay, yeah, Addison, who wins on the field?
It's tough. Alabama wins a really good game.
Okay. I actually think LSU wins. I think it is going to be like a field goal game. I'm banking on the fact that I don't think Tua is going to be as healthy as Alabama wants to sell. And I know that they're not really doing that. He keeps saying it's going to be a game time thing. He's certainly going to play. He's going to be, I think, heavily taped up. But I just think that in a game where it's just going to be back and forth, where LSU has the big-time special teams advantage, where Tua is possibly not that healthy, I actually think they go in there and pull it off. And that could be a little bit of a shocker to some, but I know a lot of people really like LSU this year for obvious reasons. So I think we're expecting a pretty awesome game, obviously. But let's move into quickly our last segment, possibly the most important segment, our Week 11 bets. Addison, you can go ahead and start this time if you just want to give a couple of them real quick and why you like those.
Okay. Just pulling up the spreadsheet.
Sure.
Okay, so we mentioned LSU, we mentioned Minnesota, and Iowa State already.
Right.
And I like the LSU Bama under, mentioned that. I've also got Clemson minus 30.5. I don't like to lay big numbers a lot, but Clemson against the ACC just to put in perspective how much they've dominated the last 2 years. And
NC State was lifeless last week and got nothing out of their new quarterback. It was pathetic.
Yeah.
That's one reason. The other reason is Clemson this year, besides the UNC game, which they only won by a point, I consider that game to be an anomaly based on the way they played the rest of the year. They haven't won an ACC game by less than 31 points, and I'm only laying 30.5. So the last 2 years, 66% of the time they've won their ACC games by more than this. They're just that much better than everyone else in the conference. So I think if you're getting Clemson versus X ACC team and you're getting it under 35 points, I kind of like that right now. So
I mean, that's just so crazy that they're that much better. I mean, that's just so pathetic.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So Cal, I'm going back to Cal this week.
Yeah, I see that.
Plus 7.5. I actually don't even remember who they're playing.
They're playing Washington State.
Oh yeah, that's right, Washington State. This is another game that they've, obviously their offense sucks. We know that, and it's whenever Cal is like an underdog, I always like them. They played Washington State pretty well defensively the past couple of years. I mean, they've got a good defense. So I like Cal plus 7.5. I also like Sparty, Illinois under 44.5. It's actually gone up, so you can get it better now. But Illinois, Brandon Peters poses very little threat to Michigan State. I think they're just going to be able to focus on the run for Illinois and shut them down offensively. Obviously, Sparty doesn't produce much offensively themselves against anyone, so I'm not really worried about this one being high scoring at all. So that's what I've got.
All right, Tolman, you want to give a few of them? You already gave your best bet, and obviously a few that we mentioned, but maybe a couple others that you didn't mention.
Friday night, I like the Beavers again at home, plus 10 against Washington.
Yep.
Kind of a weird place to play in Corvallis. Just really liking what I'm seeing from the Beavers this year. I think that, Washington's defense has just not been as effective and as efficient as we've seen in the past. I think that Oregon State can score all over Washington. May not be able to stop Jacob Eason, but, they could keep that game very close in a shootout, maybe even win the game on the field there. Washington just really doesn't have much left to play for the rest of the year. Look, this is Boston College. I got at plus 2 against Florida State. I think it's now Boston College laying 2.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
I just think that there's so much chaos going on around Florida State. Just no real direction right now. It's just a really good spot for Boston College, playing at home against Florida State with just absolutely no direction right now. I don't know. Something's weird about Notre Dame laying 8 points against Duke. You'd think that would be higher. I got them laying 6. I think that after some struggles in a couple rain games, including a big loss to Michigan, I think that Notre Dame's going to bounce back. I think they're going to destroy Duke. Haven't liked really anything I've seen from Duke this year. And then finally, this will probably be a transition to Nick's best bet, but East Carolina, SMU over 69. East Carolina is one of those teams that plays with a lot of motivation. They never, ever quit. So if you're counting on them for a garbage time touchdown, they could get it, especially against SMU's defense, which is shown to be very leaky and giving up big explosive plays.
Yeah, perfect. Best bet, ECU plus 21.5 or better. You said it, Tolman. SMU, they give up a shit ton of pass explosives. They're ranked like 128th in the nation in that. ECU gives up their fair share of explosives, but it's mostly on the ground. SMU they can create some explosives on the ground. It's mostly through the air with Buechele, though. This is more, there are some good matchup things for ECU. They The one thing that concerns me a little bit is the red zone offense, but honestly, I think they create enough explosives that is not as much of a factor. Um, this is more about SMU just had like the biggest game in their program's history in a while. I mean, that Memphis game was big. It was big for conference standings. It was big for them playing in a New Year's Six bowl. Um, and they, the score was a little closer than I think the actual outcome of that game. And Memphis kind of really put it on them. But you now have a nooner against East Carolina with Navy on deck, who's likely going to be ranked. I think this is kind of a flat spot for SMU, and I think ECU does enough to keep this within the number. And I'm not going to say that they have a chance to win this or anything because I don't think they're going to. But I was actually thinking when I made this that I should have looked a little bit at first half ECU just if I did think SMU would come out a little flat. But I think that's a solid bet. I think ECU is definitely going to create some explosives and keep that within 3 touchdowns. Tolman, I agree with you with Oregon State. Why the fuck anybody would fade Oregon State right now is beyond me. I think that Washington can be had through the air. That's where Oregon State is going to, I think, have a lot of success. And Tolman, big point that you made. Washington, I don't think this game means anything to those kids. And I think to Oregon State, this is a big deal. This is another Pac-12 win, a chance to,
Program on the rise.
Right,
sure.
right. It's a big moment for that program, the crowd in Corvallis. Friday night, Pac-12 after dark. I'm looking forward to watching this. I do agree. I think Oregon State has a chance to win this game on the field. Going to be very excited to see that. The only other, I guess,
Hey, we like the pod likes Gophers and Beavers this year.
Yeah, they're doing well for us. They're making us quite a bit of money. I think the only other bet I'll maybe mention is Louisiana Lafayette. They are at Coastal Carolina. They are an elite rushing team. They are very explosive on the ground. Coastal Carolina is not going to stop them. I don't think they're going to do enough offensively to keep up. I like Louisiana Lafayette to win that game running away. So, Corey, I'll just mention he's got Stanford -3 at Colorado as his best bet. I actually do lean Stanford when I started digging into that game. Costello's healthy now. That offensive line got, I think, at least one guy back that was injured. Colorado is getting a little healthier themselves, but I expect Costello to dice that defense because they have a very, very, very bad pass defense. Going to be interesting to see how Stanford's defense holds up. It hasn't been too great this year. Colorado probably is going to have some success moving the ball themselves, but I do lean Stanford at that point as well. Corey's also got PJ. He also is on, it looks like Iowa State as well, so this pod is pretty heavy on Iowa State and Minnesota this week. Steele with a couple Maction plays. He won't have the rest of his bets until Saturday at 3 a.m. when he wakes up to take a piss, and he takes a bunch of overs and faves, so that will be entertaining as always. But Tolman, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I thought Corey made a really good and fun point in the group chat this weekend about bipolar teams that you just like don't trust and like want to not have a stake in any game that they're playing on for the rest of the year. So I came up with my list of bipolar teams that I'm just staying away from putting any stake on games that they're involved in this year. So I got the Pokes, USC, Virginia, and Miami.
Yeah, perfect. Oklahoma State's the first team I think of when it comes to that. I have no idea what to expect from them. I think they could beat Oklahoma one week, and then I think they could lose to Kansas the next. I have no idea. Addison, any final thoughts?
Just looking forward to the games this weekend.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so as always, if you guys want to check in the description box below, I will have the up-to-date records against the spread this year and then all of our Week 11 bets. I should be able to fill those in as we get closer to game day on Saturday. I'm sure that there will be some more bets added. But otherwise, we will see you next week for the Week 12 pod.